Okay.
We're just waiting for the feed to begin.
Okay.
Oh, Ralph says we are live.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Delegate Derek Davis. I have the pleasure of being joined here today, the House Economic Matters Committee, with good friends and colleagues from the Senate Finance Committee. Welcome, senators. We're here to hear some presentations related to gas safety and the STRIDE program, as well as to get an update on some things that are going on with the moratorium. I would like to, at this time, Senator Kelly, turn it over to you for any opening comments before we get underway.
Okay. Back in.
You turn yourself off, Senator. You were already on.
Okay, fine. I won't take a lot of time. We all know that gas safety is important, and we last really visited this issue in 2013 when we did the STRIDE legislation. And we are very particularly concerned about the situation that occurred in Northwest Baltimore in the 41st district. And we'll look forward also to considering BGE's findings, if so, and I would be concerned personally in whether in cases such as this, the gas company that has priority in the area, if it shouldn't have some additional oversight when you're determining whether there's liability or not and the extent thereof. And we might want to even ask some of the persons who are signed up to testify today if there is in their thinking a need for any stepped up replacement of the aging infrastructure, or if the current calendar seems reasonable and fair. So with that, then I guess we can get started with the first witness. And was that the person from the Public Service Commission?
Is Mr. Burkowski up first?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
If he's on, he's muted.
Chairman, this is Lisa Smith.
Delegate Howard's phoned in.
Oh, there he is.
Okay.
Okay, can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, good afternoon, Chair Kelly, Chair Davis, and committee members. My name's John Borkowski, and I'm the Chief Engineer at the PSC. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss Maryland gas safety with you today. Next slide. Is somebody rolling the slide? Okay, great. All right, first, just regarding gas safety oversight, the PSC has been granted the authority to enforce pipeline safety regulations in Maryland from PHMSA. And the PSC has a pipeline safety group of 7 engineers who inspect and enforce pipeline regulations for intrastate gas facilities. PHMSA actually inspects and enforces pipeline regulations for interstate gas facilities. That's for the transmission gas pipelines that run through the state into other states. Now, although we do have various gas operators of different types with pipeline facilities in Maryland, my discussion today is focused on Maryland gas distribution utilities, of which there are now 6 with the recently completed merger of Chesapeake Utilities with Elkton Gas. Now, all but approximately 30,000 of the roughly 1.2 million gas customers in Maryland belong to 3 companies, BGE, WGL, and Columbia Gas. Next slide, please. Okay, I'd like to pivot just to talk for a second about gas safety practices. Maryland gas utilities follow federal regulations, except where the state regulations have higher standards. And I've highlighted a few of the common gas safety practices employed by Maryland utilities in this slide. I'm not going to discuss all of these unless there's a question, but I do frequently get questions, or occasionally I should say, get questions about leak surveying. So I'll talk about that for a second. Leak surveying is required every 1, 3, or 5 years. It's a federal regulation. And utilities find leaks using leak surveys. They're out there with leak detector equipment. And it's just another way of finding leaks other than getting a call about a gas odor from a resident of a building, et cetera. But PHMSA requires that the leak surveys be conducted in business districts every year. But Maryland code also requires that places of public assembly be surveyed every year. So actually Maryland code is a little bit more stricter than PHMSA regulations with that respect. And when it gets down to residential areas, that is required to be surveyed every 5 years, but some utilities actually survey more frequently. For instance, BGE surveys its residential areas every 3 years instead of the federally mandated 5 years. So I'm not going to discuss, because I've only got 15 minutes, all the items here, but if there's questions at the end, we can come back to it. Next slide, please. Okay, I'd like to give a brief STRIDE overview. And you all know, since you were involved, STRIDE legislation was enacted several years ago to allow utilities to recover accelerated gas safety and reliability infrastructure investments using a surcharge. And the state's 3 largest utilities, BGE, WGL, and Columbia Gas, all began their STRIDE programs in 2014. These STRIDE utilities are now in the 2nd year of their second 5-year cycle of their STRIDE program. So we call that STRIDE 2. The first cycle of STRIDE 1 programs was from 2014 through 2018. And and we call that STRIDE 1. And during STRIDE 1, Maryland utilities spent over $800 million and replaced almost 300 miles of main. In the second cycle of STRIDE programs called STRIDE 2, which will occur from 2019 through 2023, if all goes as planned, Maryland utilities will have spent another $1.2 billion and replace an extra 400 miles of main. So although there are a number of STRIDE targeted assets listed in this slide, I think the biggest common element among Maryland utilities in STRIDE is trying to replace vintage iron mains and bare steel mains and services. And I'd like to discuss that in more detail in the next few slides. So next slide, please. Okay, this slide illustrates gas distribution bare steel. And this is actually good news in this slide because you can see from these charts, the top chart is miles, the bottom chart is services. You can see that the Maryland gas utilities are significantly replacing bare steel mains and services. And they were starting to do this even before STRIDE legislation was enacted. So in the last 15 years since 2005, approximately 2/3 of the bare steel mains in Maryland have been replaced, and approximately 60% of the bare steel services have been replaced. Columbia Gas, in its last STRIDE case, is projecting to have all its bare steel replaced by 2027. And WGL is projecting to have all its bare steel mains and services replaced by 2025. BGE, it's good, as you can see, has a lot of services, and in its last STRIDE case, they projected to replace its bare steel services by 2033, but they should have their main replaced by 2028. And the reason it's taken a little bit longer for BGE to replace all its bare steel is because BGE also has significant replacement programs with cast iron main, which I'll discuss in the next slide. Okay. With regard to cast iron, you can see from this chart that Maryland gas utilities were replacing some iron main before STRIDE was enacted, and the ramp rate of replacement has accelerated in recent years since STRIDE was enacted. And in the last 15 years, about 20% of iron main in Maryland has been replaced. However, this slide demonstrates a significant challenge for BGE because there are still over 1,100 miles of iron main remaining in Maryland, and approximately 96% of this remaining iron main is in BGE. At BGE's current STRIDE replacement rate, it's going to take about 20 more years to replace its iron main. And BGE is replacing its main through both the STRIDE program, and they're also doing some main replacement outside the STRIDE program. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a snapshot of the Maryland gas materials inventory. And the good news on this slide is that the STRIDE targeted materials are a relatively small percentage of total Maryland gas assets, with bare steel mains and services being respectively 3% and 5% of total main and service assets, and iron main being about 7% of total main assets in Maryland, and copper services, which is another STRIDE targeted material, being about 3.6% of total assets. So if there's any takeaway from this slide, it's a small number of assets on a percentage basis, at least with these mains and services. Next slide. Okay, so why are we doing all this work? It's really to reduce leaks, and this slide demonstrates the leak rates in Maryland over the last several years, the trends with that. You can see from this chart with the light blue bars, which are the higher bars, that's the total gas leaks in Maryland, and you can see that we've had some increases over the years, especially from 2012 to 2016. But the good news is that the increase in gas leaks per mile in Maryland appears to have been arrested in recent years, and that's primarily through STRIDE investments. And now as we continue to make STRIDE investments in Maryland, we are expecting gas leak reductions by the end of STRIDE 2 in 2023. Now, that's the good news in this slide. There is some bad news in this slide. If you look at the gray bars on this slide, that's the hazardous leak rate in Maryland. And hazardous leaks represent a hazard to persons or property, and they require continuous action until conditions are no longer hazardous. And hazardous leaks are typically those leaks which you find inside of buildings or near building walls, whereas an example of a non-hazardous leak is a leak on a road or in a field where the leak's not near structures, it's not in the proximity of buildings. So non-hazardous leaks can remain in a leak repair backlog until they can be scheduled for repair, whereas hazardous leaks have to be repaired on an emergency basis. And as you can see from this chart, we've had an uptick in 2018 and 19, and this is a concerning trend that we'll have to continue to monitor. And lastly, the darker blue bar, the very small bars in this chart, represent the leak repair backlog. It's labeled on the chart as the number of leaks scheduled to be repaired at the end of the year. And as you can see from this chart, the leak repair scheduled at the end of 2019 was the lowest number in the past decade, which indicates that Maryland utilities are doing a good job scheduling and repairing leaks in a timely manner. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to transition to just discuss some major gas incidents that we've had over the last several years that impact Maryland. The explosion, the first item, the explosion at Sleepy Horse Lane in Columbia in 2015 was a result of a homeowner backing out of their townhome garage and striking a meter and the associated gas piping inside the garage. And this incident resulted in a consent agreement for BGE to implement a meter relocation and protection program as a corrective action. And BGE has done a good job of completing bollard installations and meter relocations. And by the end of 2021, they will have, or at least they're projecting to have spent approximately 12 million on these corrective actions. The next item on this chart is the Flower Branch incident in 2016 in Silver Spring. And I know that this committee is well aware of this event and has had significant discussion about this event in the past associated with the proposed Flower Branch Act. I'll just say additionally, the commission has docketed case number 9622, which is currently underway with hearings scheduled both tomorrow and Friday. So we're still continuing with that case. The third item on this chart is the Merrimack Valley incident in 2018 in Massachusetts. And while this was not a Maryland event, it does have significant Maryland impacts, which is why I added it onto this chart. You may have heard about this event from news reports. It's a situation where a low pressure gas distribution system that was servicing 3 towns in Massachusetts was overpressured. Well, what does that mean? It means that the pressure in the pipes was too high, and the pressure was about 12 times normal pressure. And it damaged 131 different structures in 3 towns, and there was 1 fatality, 21 individuals injured. It was a game-changing event for the industry. And as a result, NiSource, who's the corporate parent of Columbia Gas in Massachusetts, was fined $53 million. That's a federal fine, and lost their Massachusetts franchise. And, you know, Maryland utilities have been looking at what happened with this event. They're revisiting their work approval procedures. Some utilities are also re-evaluating their priorities in replacing low pressure gas systems in their STRIDE plans. And some are also installing additional overpressure protection devices on their gas systems as a result of this event. This event was the result of weak engineering oversight of a construction project. And then there was a National Transportation Safety Board recommendation issued to Maryland and 30 other states to consider requiring licensed professional engineer approval of natural gas infrastructure projects to strengthen review and oversight. And we currently have a PSC work group working with the utilities and other stakeholders studying this NTSB recommendation. And we do anticipate petitioning the Public Service Commission in the near future for a rulemaking session that will require licensed professional engineer review and approval of certain types of natural gas infrastructure projects. Next slide. Okay, and finally, my last slide, 2 of the more recent events. We had the Stanford Boulevard event in 2019, which involved an explosion that totally destroyed a commercial building in Columbia, Maryland, luckily with no injuries or fatalities. The PSC technical staff performed an investigation and determined the probable cause to be an underground electrical secondary cable fault, which resulted in melting of a nearby polyethylene gas service. This breach allowed natural gas to migrate into the building, where it was then ignited and destroyed the building. Staff filed its investigation with the commission, and the commission has issued a show cause order and docketed case 9653 to consider staff's report and a potential civil penalty and corrective action for BGE in this case. Finally, we had the incident in Northwest Baltimore last month where 3 homes were totally destroyed with damage to many adjacent homes. And the explosion also unfortunately resulted in 2 fatalities and 7 injuries. While this event is still under investigation by PSC technical staff because we have some outstanding information requests, we do feel like our preliminary assessments that the probable cause originated inside one of the homes in gas piping beyond the gas meter. Therefore, we feel like, at least preliminarily, this event is likely to be non-jurisdictional to the commission. So with that, and I know I went through that pretty quickly, I'm open for any questions.
Are there any questions?
Yes,
I
Mr.
got one, Chair.
Yeah.
I got one,
Delegate
Chair.
Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you explain to those of us who are new, who aren't members of the committee, when you said gas piping beyond the gas meter, what does that mean? What is gas piping in that circumstance?
Well, in this circumstances, I understand that, and the Baltimore City Fire Department, we're waiting for their report before we finalize our conclusion. But I understand it was gas piping that might have been severed to an appliance in the house.
You said
So
gas,
it's owned by the homeowner, not by the utility.
right. You said gas piping is severed to an appliance?
Yes.
Thank you.
Guys, if we could, if you have any questions, could you note it in the chat so that we don't miss anyone? I know that Delegate Charkoudian has a question, and I think I saw Delegate Howard as well. But if anybody else have any questions, if you could put it in the chat, that way we won't miss you. Whenever
You
you're
want me
ready.
to ask my question? All right. You want me to go, or you want?
No,
Laura
go
to
ahead, Delegate Howard, and then Delegate
Okay,
Charkoudian, follow
sure.
Delegate Howard.
Sure. Thank you for your briefing today, and you talked quickly about some of the cost and the mileage of infrastructure that was replaced. And you said $800 million for 300 miles of infrastructure replaced. That comes out to about $2.75 million per mile. Can you just give us, because there are new members, and help me understand what that cost covers? Is that digging up the piping and permitting? And if you could just touch on that, that would be great.
Okay, thank you for the question. I want to be very careful and probably could have spent a few more words on trying to make an apples to apples comparison with those costs. Those costs were total costs, and they not only include, mains and services, but some of the other initiatives that utilities have. So you really can't make an apples to apples comparison to come out with a cost per mile. I do know that from a cost per mile perspective, we do find that, when you get into an urban area, it's going to be a lot more expensive. And we're seeing it, for instance, some numbers from BGE were about, from what I recall in their last dry case, about $2.5 million a mile. Whereas Columbia Gas, being more rural, you can have, roughly a little bit less than $1 million a mile. But that work is for the design, the engineering, the construction, the materials, the excavations. They have to basically, come in and install new pipe and new services and pull out, or abandon the old main and services. So, it's a lot of design and engineering work, permitting. There's a lot of different tasks involved with this type work.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. One is about the Flower Branch explosion, a follow-up question on some of what you went over. And the second is related to the workforce for Stride that you may have an answer to, or others may follow with some. So on the Flower Branch explosion, if I understand correctly, the investigation, well, I know the investigation was done by the NTSB, and I can't remember why it was done by the NTSB instead of the PSC, and maybe you can explain that. But in particular, did the PSC put resources into or dedicate the PSC's engineers to that effort? Is that sort of what ended up happening on that investigation?
Yes, let me explain that. Thank you for the question, Delegate Tricodian. The PSC will always do an investigation of a gas event, and we did do an investigation in the Flower Branch. However, we can only take it so far. We turned over our results to the NTSB. We were a party to that investigation. So they had actually asked us to supply them, with our report, and we had no cause found. And the reason we had no cause found when we submitted our report was because we did not have the resources at our disposal to do all the simulations and modeling that the NTSB had at its disposal. So we participated as a party, a formal party in the NTSB event. And eventually, when the NTSB issued its report, staff, that's technical staff, accepted the probable cause determination from the NTSB. But, so that's how our investigation kind of interface with the NTSB investigation. We can only take it so far. Similar other groups did investigations. For instance, Montgomery County Fire Department did an investigation. It can only go so far too, and it did the same thing, turned over its results to the NTSB, and then the NTSB, and employed its modeling and simulations to help determine the probable cause.
So I appreciate that. And I guess my concern, the thing that I'm trying to figure out if there's a need for statutory change, my understanding is that where we are right now is the NTSB probable cause clearly points to some accountability for Washington Gas. Washington Gas has fought that. And right now we're at a situation where the PSC has determined, based on the technical case made by Washington Gas, that the findings of NTSB can't be used to hold Washington Gas accountable in the state of Maryland. And I'm wondering if you can tell me, or there may be someone else from the PSC who can tell me, is that a state statute that we would need to change? Because it seems outrageous that that all of our state resources would go into coordinating an effort for a much larger, a larger investigatory effort that NTSB has the ability to provide. And then in this state, we would be unable to move forward and hold our utilities accountable because it's an agency that's outside the state, an agency that happens to have the resources to do it. And so I'm just trying to figure out where that technicality was that Washington Gas was able to use so that the PSC is not able to use the NTSB findings against them or to hold Washington Gas accountable. Do you know, is that state, is that federal? And do you have recommendations on what we might do in this state so that when we put our resources towards this larger federal effort, we can then still use those resources to hold the utilities accountable when that's appropriate?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack with that, and I have to warn you, I'm not a lawyer, and if the chairman wants to step in, that would be fine. But my understanding is that the federal statute is 49 CFR 49-1154, which states that an NTSB report shall not be admitted into evidence or used in a civil action for damages. And I think that from what I understand, being an engineer, the reason why that's in federal statute is because the subject of an investigation is less likely to cooperate with an NTSB investigation if that subject fears that damages or significant economic consequences might result. That's a brief answer, I hope, to your first question. And regarding changes to state statutes, et cetera, I really don't have an answer I can give you at this point.
Okay. Let me ask us one other question, which is related to stride and the pace of stride. And I know we may be hearing more from the utilities about this, but one of the things that I've heard from the utilities as well as from PSC staff and OPC as well is that there's a limitation to the number of people sort of in the Mid-Atlantic region that can do this work. And because there's so much old infrastructure in the Mid-Atlantic region, we are limited in how much we can direct those, get employees to essentially do the work that needs to be done by stride. Are you able to speak to what extent the limited workforce is holding up the progress on stride or slowing the process down?
I'll give my perspective, but I think this is probably a better question, or for the utilities to address. I know when we just went through all the Stride 2 hearings with the 3 utilities, all of them proposed plans that indicated they could do the work, and they are doing the work. They're pretty much on schedule, but there has been significant impacts. Especially from the Massachusetts event on the available labor workforce. To do this work, you have to have certain qualifications. It's very highly regulated, the PHMSA operator qualification program. So there is a constraint there, and I think the market being what it is. You could probably, at least from my perspective, and I used to do project management for a utility, and you could probably always pay for resources, but the cost might be prohibitive, because it is a market out there, but it is a constrained resource, and I think it's having, an impact on both our price and to some extent, I think that the utilities have been successful in trying to navigate through that. And I think that some of the utilities, at least I've seen that in a recent rate case, are actually starting to try to hire more internal employees to try to do some of this work too. But I think that's probably a better question for some of the utilities at this hearing than I just give my limited perspective.
And are the employees who expand the natural gas infrastructure the same as those who might work on fixing the old natural gas infrastructure?
I think that you have different skill sets there, and you can't, the people who are replacing services, for instance, might not be the same people who are, doing your main work, et cetera. So again, I think that's probably a better question for the utilities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Impalaria. Unmute yourself if you're there, Delegate Impalaria.
How about now? Can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay. I'm still, Mr. Prokowski, BG&E is, from my understanding, the oldest natural gas utility company in the country. And which means it's got the oldest infrastructure. And stride was something that we were all very reluctant to do. And I know the Public Service Commission was very reluctant originally about stride. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions. First off, because it has been going quite a while, do you see stride as being successful in making the gas line utilities safer?
Okay, Delegate Imperial, I'm sorry, I'm butchering your name, but is that the only question, or you have a second question?
No, and the second question is, because one of the concerns would there would be abuses with Stride. Does the Public Service Commission have any records or documents that maybe there has been abuses with Strides, or do you think at this point it has been used properly?
Okay. First question about Stride being successful. I do think Stride has been successful, and I think when you look at the leak chart that I showed, where the number of gas leaks per mile in Maryland has leveled off and plateaued, and we're expecting it to go down. I think you could see just from that slide that we're starting to see the results. I think before you stop any trend that's increasing, you got to plateau first, and then you can go down. And I think we're at that point. And, I didn't talk a lot about the leak rates in Maryland, but the types of assets that are being replaced here, when you look at that leak chart, we get like 0.46 leaks per mile. Some of the assets, that are being replaced, we got, high pressure steel services being replaced that had a leak rate of 6.7 leaks per mile. We got cast iron mains that have, 2.25 leaks per mile. We've got bare steel mains and services at 1.5. So they're all significantly higher than the state average. So you can see that replacing that infrastructure is going to have a positive effect on reducing the leak rate and also improving safety to the public. So I do think from that perspective, it's been successful, and you really have to do it. At the previous pace that some of the utilities were going with their replacement programs, it would have taken many, many years, many decades to replace this infrastructure. So I think to that extent, Stride has been successful. And as far as
Well, my second question, I think you're just moving to that now.
Yeah, as far as the second question, I think that all the utilities have had a learning curve with Stride, and there are actually, I wouldn't say there are any abuses. I know that there have been cost overruns, and there has been less mileage completed than originally expected, but I think that's a result of utilities ramping up and trying to get experience with Stride. And I think that now that we've been through that first cycle, I think it's running a lot more smoothly the second cycle. So I don't think there have been any abuses, although there have been, some lessons learned and a learning curve here.
So if I could just follow up and say, we did make the right decision moving forward with Stride, and you believe you as the Public Service Commission and those who were there before you have done an excellent job of monitoring it and working with the utility companies to get the best result.
I believe so. I believe so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? If not, we can move on to the next portion, and thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Who do we have now, Bob? Do you know?
Next up, we have BGE, which should be Charles Washington, Chris Burton, and Dan Herson, talking about Stride.
Good afternoon,
We
Chairman
have the
Davis.
slide deck.
Shall we proceed, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman Davis and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Charles Washington here on behalf of BGE. I'm joined today by Chris Burton, BGE's Vice President of Gas, and Dan Herson, our Assistant General Counsel. In advance of this briefing, we provided answers to the committee staff's specific questions in writing. Mr. Burton will proceed through BGE's presentation on our natural gas infrastructure and Stride. And Mr. Herson and I are here to be available for questions as appropriate. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Chair Davis. Making sure you can hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, if we can advance the slide to the next slide. Just a summary stride that was approved and was explained by the engineering staff for PSC. Accelerates replacement of our aging infrastructure and focuses on safe, modern, and environmentally sound gas infrastructure, and also serves as a boost to the economy. Prior to STRIDE, we were estimated on about a 100-year timeline. About 1,300 miles of cast iron main remained at that time, and 42 miles of bare steel. And as was mentioned, the current pace, which is about 50 miles per year on average, the replacement would take about till 2040, so about 20 more years at the current pace. If we can advance to the next slide, please. Just a reminder of the process, and again, this was approved in this committee and by the Public Service Commission. There are 5-year STRIDE projects. We're actually in the second STRIDE process right now, and the increments or cost recovery is capped at $2 per month in terms of a fee to residential customers. Each year in November, we submit to the Commission a set of proposed projects, the bounds of those projects, which neighborhoods are impacted by each of those projects, the number of miles we would be replacing, the number of customers we would be impacting, all within an area. The projects are typically about 2.5 miles of infrastructure per project. And then we give an estimated cost for that project. And projects, as was mentioned before, air projects range, I'll say all in on average, to about $2.5 to $2.75 million per mile. It does vary when you're in dense urban areas versus the suburbs, how much is in streets versus how much is in grass or other types of areas. We do, during mid-year, file a report on our progress and provide additional reports and discuss that with the Public Service Commission. And then each year there's a third-party audit that's done to monitor the progress and the cost that are spent each year. So that's done. And again, as we said, the first 5-year STRIDE process was from 2014 to 2018, and we're in the second STRIDE process. If we can advance to the next slide. In terms of what we've done so far, total of 257 miles has been completed to date, representing 231 miles of cast iron and 26 miles of bare steel that has been replaced. And you can see this was data as of the end of 2019, a total of about 1,083 miles remained in the service territory as part of what we would call outmoded equipment, cast iron and bare steel. To date, what's been completed of that 257, about 142 miles of that has been within Baltimore City. And of the 1,083 remaining, Baltimore City makes up about 75% of that. As I mentioned, our STRIDE 2 program is an average of 48 miles per year. That's, again, we are on target for that. We do have about an average of $2.5 million a mile. And the total remaining cost in today's dollars would be about $2.7 billion. If you can advance to the next slide, please. In terms of, what would it take to accelerate? And part of this is workforces. But, when we think about our projects, each of them is about 2.5 miles of infrastructure. Really, in order to accelerate, we would need to probably double the size of a project. So instead of doing about 2.5 miles of infrastructure, sort of doing about the same number of projects, but double the scope, about 5 miles per infrastructure. And that would really be more impactful. We would be trying to work with the state agencies, jurisdictions, and communities to be able to facilitate that in a way that we could get that done in a reasonable time. It would also take policies to align capital and to do that within the desired time frame. In terms of resources, we have ramped up since the beginning of STRIDE 1 to a steady state set of resources to do the 48 miles per year. That's where we're at right now. There is some work done, some opportunistic work to replace outside of Stride. But in order to go above that, we would have to add resources as well. If you can go to the next slide. Just speaking a little bit about the recent incident that occurred in August. First, our thoughts and prayers are certainly with the impacted families by the incident that occurred on August 10th, 2020. In terms of that, BG did immediately respond to the incident to make conditions safe and to inspect all of our equipment and coordinate with the Baltimore City Fire Department. Subsequent to that, both that day and in the subsequent days, we completed inspection of all of our gas and electrical equipment in the immediate area, as well as the surrounding neighborhood, to ensure that everything was working. That included our gas mains and our gas services and meters, and as well as the electric equipment. And some of the leak survey equipment that was mentioned previously is what we use to verify that. We found all of our equipment operating safely and not the cause of the explosion that occurred on August 10th. We continue to work with investigators, and we will continue to cooperate and work with them in whatever way possible in order to any findings associated with that event. And if we can go to the next slide, please. I think that's all my prepared presentation, and I guess I'm open for any questions you may have.
Let me go to Delegate Bridges and then Delegate Impalaria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I do have just two quick questions. One, in the last presentation, I think John talked about the fact that BG&E does surveys of the communities every 3 years in Baltimore City. You may not know this off the top of your head, but do you know when was the last time a survey was done on Labyrinth Road? And the second question is, I realize that we're still waiting for the investigation to wrap up, but there are certain individuals that still have not been able to get let back into their homes, and some, even after the explosion, it took a while before they were able to get back into their homes. And one of the things that we've heard from constituents is the fact that they, during this economic downturn, are looking for assistance. And one of the ways that they were asking for assistance is whether or not they could have some sort of, moratorium on the time that they were away from paying their BG&E bill, which, for some has become a hard time for them. And so those are the two questions that I had. One, when was the last time a survey was done on Labyrinth Road? And two, if there's an opportunity to assist those individuals, especially the ones that are still not in their home, with their BG&E bills, what could be done?
Okay, thank you for the question, Delegate Bridges. I guess in terms of the leak survey, and as was mentioned, we do commercial areas and areas of assembly every year. That's an annual survey that we do. We actually do all residential areas on a 3-year cycle. So we actually, we exceed the requirements from a PHMSA perspective on that. That specific neighborhood was done in the June-July 2019 timeframe, so about a year prior to this event, and no issues were found. We did, subsequent to the event, do a special leak survey, not only of that block, but of the surrounding blocks in the area. I believe we found 2 very minor issues that we corrected immediately. Nothing that was what we would call a hazardous condition. So in terms of the second question, I don't know all the specifics of that, but certainly we are always looking to work with customers that call us to make some types of arrangements in that. We did reach out and make donations to the Red Cross and others to help with assistance. And we're always looking for opportunities to work with our customers.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Delegate Impalaria, if you're finished, Delegate Bridges.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Burton, thank you for being here today. And we talked about the fact that BG&E is the oldest gas utility company. Do you know in Baltimore City what the average age of the gas system is the gas lines?
Delegate Implaria, no, I don't have that information off the top. I'm sure we could actually, run some numbers to do with that. But, I would say that our cast iron and bare steel was all put in, prior to 50 years ago. Cast iron was last put in the 1950s. It actually is a very good performing asset when you look at that, but you do end up with leaks in the joints. We have a little bit of bare steel left. I think our total bare steel infrastructure across our entire service territory is only 16 miles. But certainly, Baltimore City, not just but as the urban center was where, the oldest pipe would be, just because that was where the activity was.
Okay, and I'm going to follow up on that. So my great grandmother's house is in Overley. It's 100 years old. It has a gas system in it. That gas system in that house is 100 years old after your meter. Do you, as a utility company, start to have concerns about the other end of that gas line that's a past your meter, and that system in that home being 100 years old? And I would think that that's one of the newer neighborhoods in Baltimore. There's neighborhoods that are a lot older than that. What's your thoughts on that? And should we address that in the future? Because Stride is fantastic at fixing it to the house, but it sounds like a lot of these gas line explosions are being caused after the meter. So what is your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, like you said, if the house was 100 years old and that's when the piping was put into the house, if it is still the initial equipment, it would still be 100 years old. Certainly we've seen many houses many neighborhoods go through, upgrade projects. And when people come in and they put in new heating systems or new, stoves or things of that nature, that is an opportunity to bring them up to current standards with new equipment and things of that nature. That's really the jurisdiction of, plumbing companies and others, but certainly it would be an opportunity to upgrade that infrastructure.
And I guess the reason I'm bringing that question up is because when that accident happens, the finger is first pointed at you, the utility company, and we have to go through the investigation. But by the time the investigation comes out, people believe it's the utility company's fault. When if that house is 100 years old, I can imagine there's houses that have 150-year-old gas systems that are still there. And maybe we need to find a way to address that, you're talking about with Stride cutting down the accident rate on your side of meter. And I think we've done a great job, and you've done a great job with that. I guess we need to figure out what we do to cut down on the accident rate on the other side of the meter, especially in places like Annapolis and Baltimore, where you have a very old infrastructure and you have houses that are still, running with that pipe. I mean, you look at that pipe, it's 100 years old. From the outside, it looks good, but the joints, like you're saying, and the inside, we don't know what they look like.
Yeah, and just one point, we do have public awareness campaigns. If people smell gas, we respond to that odor call. We are there 24/7 to respond to every odor call, whether it's outside or inside the houses. In fact, during certain times of year, there are more odor calls we get due to inside the houses, and it could be piping or equipment and appliances and things of that nature. And we would make it safe and then refer them to a contractor to get it fixed.
Thank you, Ms. Burton.
If I can, Chair Kelly, then Delegate Charkouti, and Chair Kelly, I need to step away for just a minute. Would you mind taking over, please?
Sure, I'll do the best I can.
Thank you.
My question is, going back to the Labyrinth Road situation, what kind of public education campaign have you instituted in that area, or are you instituting regular basis so that property owners and residents of residential properties know what not to do or what to avoid in order to not create the situation that resulted in this accident?
Or,
Somebody a block away doing whatever it is you say someone did wrong and they don't know any better.
I guess, thank you for your question, Chair Kelly. We go through several different things in terms of a public information campaign each year. Some of those are through bill inserts. Some of those are ads on television, ads that we do, and campaigns for children associated with our Captain More Captain campaign about if you smell gas to actually call us and that we respond 24/7, no cost to the customer, things of that nature. We also regularly communicate with the contractor community. Some of that is associated with just general gas safety, as well as our 811 campaign about being careful with calling before you dig, things of those natures. Certainly, following this event, we will continue to look at those campaigns and to say, are there other things we can be doing to improve the outreach to customers?
Because whatever it was that you say a property owner or a resident of a property did to their building or to their residence that created the underlying issue, the public doesn't know about. I've been watching and waiting and looking online to see what there is to tell me what not to do. And I don't know. Who is liable to reimburse the property owners who lost their property and the tenants who lost their homes? In this case, in the Labyrinth Road situation.
Yeah, I don't know that I know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Okay, this is a question, and I'll ask the people from the PSC. One last thing is, are there third-party experts who ought to, by state law or regulation, be brought in a case like this to at least look over the findings of the utility whose infrastructure was impacted?
Yeah, I guess
just asked to take BGE's word for their findings. And it would seem to me with something this serious, there ought to be some kind of a regular protocol that under these circumstances would bring in someone, not BGE. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anybody, but I think in any such situation, if I accidentally went out and somebody ended up dead, but because of anything that I was involved with, you wouldn't expect that I have the last word in determining who is liable.
Yeah, I guess just to speak, I mean, we are not investigating anything beyond the meter. We are cooperating with, I guess, initially it was the Baltimore City Fire Department, who was the incident command, and with other agencies like the Public Service Commission and others that were on site. And we were doing testing of air facilities to make sure they were safe. And we provided all the information, and most of that testing was done with oversight of others, like the Public Service Commission, technical staff and all. At this point, we are cooperating with all those agencies, but we are not really investigating anything beyond our equipment. That's really not our jurisdiction and really not our expertise. But I do think that the fire department and others will be investigating that fully.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Madam Chair, I think that I was next, if I may.
Okay, Delegate Chakorian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Burton, thank you for that presentation. Can you quickly said something about workforce. I'm still trying to understand this issue of workforce and to what extent the limited workforce is affecting our the timeline for Stride, right? To the extent that there's urgency in the safety concerns that we have, and there's a balancing act, I understand, on rate recovery and the payment over time. But can you also speak to that workforce piece? I'm not sure I understood what you said in that slide that you mentioned that.
Okay, I guess let me start, and then if there are any follow-up questions you have, you can certainly ask me. During Stride 1, we've ramped up to a rate where we are able to replace about 50 miles of main per year. And when we talk about the gas main, that includes the services and replacing the services into those houses. And in many cases, we're upgrading from a low pressure to a medium or high pressure. So the meters and regulators, so the work to be able to do all that. And we have ramped up the resources to be able to do that right now. We also, as part of our stride, are replacing anywhere from 5,500 to 6,000 high pressure steel services. So not part of their cast iron program, but that's another, I'll say a leaking asset that is we're replacing. So we have resources that are tied to that program as well. So we are, and per the Stride 2 program, that was approved at 48 miles per year, and we have the resources to be able to do that. If we were to want to increase the rate, we would have to either shut down some other program that we have and redeploy those resources or add resources. And what I'd say is you can do that over time. We've ramped up from what was a nominal amount to 48 to 58 miles per year. And we believe we can continue to ramp that up. It involves working with our contractors to get skilled resources in, to get them trained, to get them qualified. And we would continue to work on that. So it is possible. It's not a step function. They're not readily available that you can increase it at a very high rate. We believe we could, increase 5 to 10 miles per year to ramp up to a higher steady state number.
Would pulling people off of potential natural gas expansion that you have proposed right now and that's proposed in different parts of the state, would pulling people off that put them in a position to be able to ramp up Stride?
Those are typically different skilled resources. When you work on expansion, you're putting in pipe that is not pressurized. You're not dealing with live gas at that time. Most of that infrastructure is put in, and then you actually use a skilled resource to come and actually gas it up and then make the connections. So
that second group of people would be the same set of people. The first set wouldn't.
I'll say the second set it is, but that's a very small portion of the total job associated with it. And the stride work also does have, because we're upgrading from low pressure to medium and high pressure, does have some, and you're working with live gas, there is a different qualification status there for those resources.
Got it. But things like moving meters outside of homes, moving regulators outside of homes. One of the things I was told with the bill we had last year is one of the reasons that couldn't move faster was because they were the same as the Stride people. But it sounds like maybe that's a different workforce because your Stride folks are dealing with the pipelines and the high pressure pipelines. But are those the same people as would move regulators outside of buildings?
So it's a combination. Part of the issue with moving meters and regulators outside of buildings is that then becomes the transition point between company-owned assets and customer-owned assets. And the resources on the customer-owned side are plumbing resources. It's a different code. It's through the actual local jurisdiction. So you then have to get two different sets of resources, both the plumbing resources as well as the utility resources, and coordinate those activities.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is because one of the reasons that I was told that we couldn't have a quicker timeline to implement the NTSB recommendation of moving regulators outside of buildings was because if we prioritize that, it would take people and resources away from Stride. So I'm just trying to understand who these various workforces are that are addressing the different pieces of this, I feel like I'm hearing different conflicting answers about that. I understand that different people work on different parts of it, but so
Delegate Charkouti and this Charles Washington, if I may, just kind of add just a little bit of context. I believe the context of the conversation we had on the legislation last year was really relative to the original scope of the bill that looked at any residential structure with 2 or more meters on site, which for BGE was a really large universe of projects, over 65,000. And I think that created the concern, that original scope, that we would have the workforce available to get that work done. I believe the original timeline was 5 years in the bill. And so I think it's in the context of the scope of the number of projects and the time frame that was in the original legislation that we expressed concerns about the workforce.
Okay. So I'll just close with this. I don't want to take up too much of this hearing. We can address it in the hearing on my bill. But I guess what I'm hearing is we have a safety issue, everyone agrees. There's a need to upgrade a system, everyone agrees. There's a need to move meters outside, NTSB agrees. There may be mixed opinions amongst you all. There's workforce limitation to do all of those things. And at the same time, while current gas customers are not as safe as they ought to be, BG&E, Washington Gas, Columbia Gas, others are working on expanding the natural gas infrastructure in the state. And I think that we may need to take a really hard look at this question of why is it that we have resources, especially workforce resources, to expand customer base, put more people on natural gas at a time, frankly, when we probably should be electrifying everything. But specifically on the safety side, where are those resources coming away from as we do that expansion? And so you don't need to speak directly to that. I mean, you can if you want. I'm still trying to track this workforce issue and how we really make sure everyone is as safe as possible and prioritize that in resource deployment for our regulated utilities, rather than doing something that expands the market, brings in more certainly for shareholders, but may or may not be prioritizing the safety of our current customers who need to be our top priority. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Okay. Well, I guess with no other questions to you, we could move on to the next panelist, who is Chairman Stanek of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Kelly, Chair Davis, and members of both the Finance Committee and the Economic Matters Committee. Obviously, a lot has changed since the last time we met in March of this year. If you'll permit me, what I'll do is walk you through some of the key dates along a timeline stretching from March of this year through this coming November. And I'll share with you some of the actions that the PSC has taken along the way and some upcoming dates that will be both important to you and to your constituents. We'll begin at March 16th of this year. That is the date when the commission suspended operations at its headquarters in Baltimore, and we entered our COOP plan. It is also the same date that Governor Hogan issued his executive order issuing the utility disconnection moratorium, which, in addition to prohibiting the utilities that we are subject to the PSC's jurisdiction from turning off utility services to customers, they could also restrict the assessment of late fees and collection activities. I would tell you, because of that moratorium that the governor issued, which was in effect until September 1st, complaints against the utilities dropped by an astounding number. The Consumer Affairs Division at the PSCs recorded a decrease of somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% in terms of complaints. And that should not be surprising, because nobody was losing their service or having issues regarding repayment of their arrearages due to the moratorium. By April, since the residential customers were largely protected, the commission turned its attention to shore up the financial status of our utilities by explicitly allowing them to use preferred accounting treatment to book and record and track expenses related to the pandemic. We issued that order on April 9th. We were one of the first states in the country to do so. Many other states followed Maryland's lead to provide their utilities with some degree of certainty that at a later date, those costs would be possibly recovered in a future rate case. So that was our major activity in the month of April. As we move forward to both May and June of this year, and as the virus continued to spread as the economic fallout increased and the unemployment numbers increased as well, the commission began to develop a list of information that it believed it would be necessary to obtain from the utilities to get a much better understanding of the impacts not only on utility operations, but also the impact of our customers, both residential, commercial, and industrial customers. So if we could turn to the first slide, it's a very short deck, 3 slides here. On July 8th, we announced the creation of a new public conference designated as PC 53 to examine the impacts of COVID-19 on both the utilities and the customers. Although we're going to focus largely on ratepayer impacts, the conference scope was much wider, where we looked at operational changes to our utilities and the treatment of utility employees. We looked at the impact and reliability of usage and load on the grid. Overall, we've seen about 8% decrease in electricity usage during this period. We also wanted to look at the financial health of our utilities going into this crisis. We have many different types of utilities in the state, including investor-owned utilities, municipally owned utilities, and of course, our member-owned cooperatives. In addition to that, we wanted to take a look at the impact of the regulatory asset that I just mentioned a minute ago and how the utilities are using that. But most importantly, and which was the focus of our conference in PC 53, was the impact on residential customers and the payment trends. As you could see from the third bullet on this chart, we've experienced mounting electric and gas arrearages that have been reported by the utilities, north of $250 million that are currently owed by Maryland ratepayers to their utilities. If we could move to the next slide, please. We had a 3-day conference at the end of August where we heard from the utilities, Office of People's Counsel, Office of Home Energy Programs. We heard from energy efficiency advocates and low-income advocates. It was a very difficult 3 days of listening to extended testimony. And at the conclusion, the commission determined to move forward a comprehensive package that was unanimously approved, setting forward 5 very important steps. And what you see on this screen are the motions that the commission adopted on August 31st, which was 1 day before Governor Hogan's utility moratorium was set to expire. The first bullet was that we extended the governor's moratorium from September 1st to October 1st, providing customers with additional month of protection. Then we advanced the required notice from the termination notice date to provide customers with an additional 45 days. So that's 30 days plus 45 days. The reason we determined 45 days was the appropriate amount of time was because that is how long it typically takes for a customer to navigate through the OHEP process to both apply for and be qualified for energy assistance. We also mandated that the utilities require that they provide their customers for a minimum of a 12-month repayment plan with no questions asked. So that payment plan is free for the asking. Or if you've been qualified as low income by OHEP, you could ask for a 24-month repayment plan because there's a good chance you have a large arrearage that has been building up since March, if not before March. This will allow that customer to spread their payments over a 24-month period. 2 more items that we required. We prohibited down payments and security deposits as a condition to entering a payment plan. And finally, we provided 1 extra opportunity. If you fail to meet the terms of your payment plan and that payment plan is deemed broken, you'll have 1 opportunity to essentially a do-over to work with the utilities to enter a new payment plan. We can move to the next slide, please. The commission continues to act going forward. Obviously, the date of October 1st is only 1 week away. that is when the moratorium is set to expire. November 15th is the earliest that any utility could terminate a customer for non-payment. So November 15th is also an important date. I should note that the utilities are not planning to send out all the termination notices on October 1st. Those notices will be staggered, and the utilities will determine on what basis to issue those notices to their customers. Only then, when a notice is dated, does the 45-day clock begin to run. The commission also wants to explore whether arrearage management programs would benefit some of our customers and be a cost-effective solution. Obviously, it costs the utility a considerable amount of money to chase bad debt. Would it be smarter to provide incentives to utility customers to pay some amount with the potential of receiving an incentive later on in terms of having some of those arrearages forgiven? The utilities have until October 7th to provide those proposals to the commission for review, with the public having an opportunity to respond to them by October 28th. We will then conduct an evidentiary hearing on the arrearage management programs. This slide is one day out of date. A detailed order in PC 53 was also issued yesterday, requiring the utilities to provide more detailed and granular data once termination notices are issued. Those data reports will be required to be submitted publicly by November 1st and every month, the first of the month going thereafter. And it will provide approximately 10 different types of data to allow us to determine who is being disconnected, who is entering repayment plans, and effectively the level of the arrearages, and are we getting control of that mounting crisis? As you know, if the customer does not pay for their arrearages they owe, their neighbors will, barring any government bailout to erase those past bad debts. So that is what the commission has been doing since March, and what we'll be working on in the coming months. I've told the public before that I believe that we will be getting through this crisis. I issued this commentary in the Baltimore Sun earlier this month. And we've received the commitment from our utilities in the state that they will be flexible and they will work with customers who are willing to have a conversation with them. With that, I'll yield back to the chair. Thank you.
Chairman Stanek, before we go to delegates Ahrens and Fennell in that order, I was wondering, I wanted to go back to something you said, sir, if I understand it correctly, because there's been a lot of conversation about moratoriums on the utility shutoffs and extensions and so forth. Are you saying that if let's say if the General Assembly were to pass legislation to extend that, say maybe another 4 months or whatever the case may be, this is ultimately not borne by the utility? Any payments that aren't made, it's borne across, I guess, all customer classes. Is that essentially what I'm hearing, or am I misunderstanding?
That is exactly what you're hearing. Hence the need for us to get a handle on this problem sooner rather than later. The utility will not bear the expense of any bad debt. It would be bared by you and your constituents.
Okay. Delegate Ahrens and then Delegate Fennell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Stanek. My questions really fall in line with what my other chairman said. I just wonder if, I appreciate all you said about how we're going to collect these payments and arrears and all that. But these dollars and cents and these people that can't pay it, they're in the lower paying jobs that if you look at how we're opening up as a state and trying to get our businesses back together, what is a realistic number to even recoup some of these payments? These aren't the people making $100,000 a year, and that money is ultimately going to come down. You're looking today, $300 million in arrears as of today, and that number's probably going to go up. Do you have any real feel for what that expectation that's going to be spread throughout the base is?
Thank you, Delegate Ahrens. That is a great question. I am under no illusion that a large amount of this arrearage will never be paid by customers because they may have obviously fallen on hard times and the hole is only getting deeper and deeper, and it may be impossible at some point to dig yourself out of that hole. Hence why we initiated this additional proceeding to look at arrearage management programs, which are successfully used in other states, including Delaware and New York, and try to figure out how do we do the best job to limit the amount of bad debt that will be borne by all ratepayers in Maryland. And I have no doubt that that will occur. But how do we lessen the damage to the amount possible? And I'm hopeful that this conference will begin to shed some light on that.
Okay, follow-up is this information being conveyed to the governor as he's going through his openings and trying to get us to open more and more? Is he aware of this circumstance and how that burden's going to go on these people? That stigma is going to stay with these people. Once you're in arrears, and you're going to be in that for quite some time, whether you legally have the money or not. Is he being updated on this circumstance?
As an independent agency, I do not have any direct contact with the governor, but I expect that the governor's office is aware that any bad debt is not borne by the utility, but that is speculation.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam.
Sure. Can we go to Delegate Fennell, followed by Senator Augustine, Delegate Walker, and Vice Chair DeMay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is that you stated that termination letters is going to start going out. What did you say, the third week in October? Because as you know,
October 1st.
calls. I'm sorry, say it again.
October 1st, I thought I heard.
October the 1st, so we'll be, okay, it's October the 1st, so we will be getting a lot of calls from our constituents stating that they can't be able to pay for their utilities. So I just wanted to know and be prepared in reference to when this is going to roll out. Okay.
Yes, termination notices will begin no earlier than October 1st. And hence the need for all of us, PSC, for legislators to make use of your communication stream to notify your constituents. Now is the time to ask for money. There is free money, effectively free money out there. Over $170 million currently sits unclaimed, managed by OHEP. And they are more than happy to begin to qualify applicants to receive this energy assistance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Augustine?
Thank you, Chairman Davis and Chair Stanek, for coming and talking with us today. I've got basically two questions. The first one is, have you guys considered extending an additional month, considering that we really haven't had any change in the financial, sort of the financial conditions of the state? So that's my first question. And then the second one is, in keeping with that, I'm very, very concerned about the timing, if it is in fact October 1st, in that it's getting to be cold. And we know that, as the temperatures drop, I am extremely concerned. The timing is quite frankly a little bit dubious, quite honestly. It's before, as you well know, the temperatures reach that threshold where you're not cutting people off, versus, in a couple, but it's in the time where it will be when people really desperately need heat. So if you would just share with me your thoughts on that, I would really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Augustine. Obviously, there is no good time to do this, but there are some times that are better than others, of course. We do have winter restrictions built into state law on when electric and gas utilities can turn off customers and when they can't. We do have a winter restriction period that runs from November 1st to March 31st of every year, which require the utilities to check about a dozen more boxes, including taking a look at what the temperature is on a particular day before effectuating the termination of service. Obviously, the situation in Maryland, it's not great, but it is improving. The majority of states in the United States now no longer have a moratorium in effect. However, the Northeast, many states do. Our neighbors to the south in Virginia, their moratorium is set to expire October 5th, Delaware, November 1st, and Pennsylvania on December 1st. These are all obviously going into the winter. There is no good time to put the brakes on this problem, but I believe that with the package of protections that we've issued, notwithstanding that terminations can begin in November 15th. I am hopeful, and I recognize that this is not ideal, but I am hopeful that there will be no terminations, that customers will contact their utilities and contact social services agencies to begin to receive that assistance. If they receive that assistance, the utilities have committed not to turning off any customers.
Chair Stanek, I appreciate that answer. I will respectfully suggest that I would hope that we would extend the moratorium in the sense that, this is still really troubling times for our people and for, it's a unique time too, with regard to COVID and us getting through this together. And I just don't think this is the time to add additional stress and strain to our state by virtue of really, doing this type of action at this time. So I really appreciate you taking my feedback on that and all that you can do to mitigate this for our least fortunate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Augustine. And I will readily admit, as my 20 years as a utility regulator, both as a federal and state regulator, these have been some of the most difficult decisions that I've had to grapple with.
Thank you.
Delegate Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a question. Maybe I missed it. Do we know, did any of the, maybe you addressed it, I might have missed it. Did any of the utilities in the state of Maryland receive any federal bailout money?
I do not know if they received any CARES funding. I should strike that. I am aware that both Chop Tank Electric Cooperative and Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative did receive PPP funding through the federal government.
Okay, so obviously you applied for that money. It's a tough time going on business climate wise. Now, when somebody is in arrears of their bill, you're asking them to call their utility and talk. What are we expecting the utility to say? The utility is going to ask them how much money you make, what's your job situation like, and some people are going to be above the minimum threshold, the income threshold, particularly the areas in Prince George and Montgomery County where they won't qualify for these dollars. So what do you expect a family to do?
These are very, very interesting times, and the utilities have given us their commitment and have demonstrated that they're going to be changing everything from their call center operations to using proactive outreach to contact customers that are in threat of possibly losing service. If they can't pay, and if they say, well, I'm out of a job, you can't squeeze blood out of a stone, they will provide referrals to OHEP and other social services agencies that may be able to assist them.
If I may ask, what determines if they can pay or not? Is it strictly income based?
Well, it's largely tied to whether the customer is eligible for other needs-based programs, such as food assistance, any other type of public assistance. And I believe the OHEP representative may be able to shed a little more regarding the criteria.
So I was going to say, Delegate Walker, OHEP, they're going to follow shortly. They may be able to give you a more detailed answer than perhaps the chairman can.
All right, and if I can, this one, I'm glad you're addressing the call centers, because I've got constituents down here who I've told them, hey, you're getting this aid. They can't shut you off right now, but they were told the phone calls that they received from the different utility companies had them in fear that they were going to get shut down. Like the people are saying, oh, you need to do this now. You need to do this. So I'm glad you're addressing that. And thanks for your leadership with that.
Thank you, Delegate. And if I could just use one moment to just note that unfortunately, there are some scam artists that are now operating in the state, calling customers saying that they are the utility and they need to pay over the phone with a credit card. The utility will never make that demand. And unfortunately, we've seen some customers that under this threat of termination are readily giving away their financial information over the phone, and that should not happen.
Let me go to Vice Chair DeMay, then Senator Hershey, and then Delegate Crosby.
There we go. Commissioner Stanek, it's nice to see you, or Chairman Stanek. I guess in your presentation, one of the programs you talked about, the utilities are beginning to look at, has to do with if somebody makes some payments that they may forgive some arrearages. It's actually been very effective in the child support world to have that sort of a program available. And I think that would help. But is there any other programs or anything the regulator is going to do to make sure that the utilities take some of the risk and some of the loss as we as ratepayers will? And if so, what is in the pipeline to consider that? I mean, you know, I understand no business wants to take any loss, but
Vice Chair, that is a concern that has been aired by many on the editorial pages ever since COVID has hit, that the utility sector is one industry that doesn't necessarily need to share in the pain because they are guaranteed cost recovery and guaranteed to receive a reasonable rate of return on their rate base. So that is the situation that we're in. That is the environment, and it is the law. Of course, we could ask the utilities to dig deeper into their pockets and defer some of this, but obviously that would not be in their shareholders' interest to do so. And here I'm talking about investor-owned utilities. This is the way traditional rate making has been made since this agency began in 1910. I'm sorry, but I know that's not a fulfilling answer to your question.
Senator Hershey?
It appears that Senator Hershey may have stepped away from his desk.
Then we'll come.
I'm on the phone. I'm on the phone right now. You hear me?
Gotcha.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Stanek, just to follow up on the Vice Chair's comments, obviously there are a lot of businesses that have suffered through this pandemic that are not being made whole, and that are having to absorb a lot of bad debt and also non-payment as well. While I do understand that the utilities are regulated and they're guaranteed a rate of return, isn't that just on the distribution side of the bill? And what does that mean for the supply side, the energy costs specifically? Are they guaranteed a rate of return on that, or will the other ratepayers or all the other ratepayers just have to bear the costs from the distribution side?
So from the supply side, it's simply it's a pass through. The utilities aren't earning a return on that, whether it be through SOS or a third party energy supplier. Our utilities are earning a return on the accumulated rate base that has been accrued, in addition to any expenses, operating and maintenance expenses that the PSC determines to be prudent.
But would the PSC allow the pass-through costs to be recovered by ratepayers as well?
Senator, I need to think about that. I actually don't know the answer. I need to think a little more about that, and I'll provide you with a response offline.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, both chairmen.
Thank you, Senator.
Delegate Crosby?
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. And I think Madam Vice Chair, and I don't know who the previous senator was, essentially asked Senator Hershey a great question. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being here. I guess my only follow-up to that is, what do you think would be a recommended threshold to which shareholders should feel some of the hurt that is going to get passed off to the remaining ratepayers? I mean, shouldn't they feel something in this?
And that is the debate that's currently underway. Should investor-owned utilities have receive some of the economic fallout that every other business is receiving? I will note that in your district, you're represented by a cooperative, a member-owned cooperative. So we're dealing with a situation that is totally different over there, because the members will feel that effectively that pain. It is something that the legislature may consider. It would be a major shift in the way that not only Maryland sets rates, but most other public service commissions around the country in terms of having some type of threshold where the utility and its shareholders would effectively pay for some of the, or be impacted by some of the loss.
Yep, I appreciate it. And I recognize SMECO is different, but just trying to look at the state as well.
Thank you, Delegate.
Is there anyone? Oh, I think I see one more. Who is it? I think that's everybody. Did I miss anyone? If I did not, we can go to the next presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Chair Kelly, and members of the committee. My name is Bill Freeman with the Office of Home Energy Programs. I'm happy to be with you today to talk about energy assistance in the context of the current return to collections activities. And I'm going to start with an overview of energy assistance. We're not before this committee very often. I did have the opportunity to see some of you on a retreat and talk about energy assistance last year. So if you were on the committee last year, it's good to see you again. Next slide, please. So the Office of Home Energy Programs within the Department of Human Services provides bill assistance to low-income households in the state of Maryland to make those costs both more affordable and to prevent the loss of services. And I think that's particularly pertinent mission at this point in time. Next slide, please. I think it's important to just show the setup of the Office of Home Energy Programs throughout the state. We work with a mix of local departments of social services, contracted community action agencies, and local governments, depending on jurisdiction. And this is just a breakdown of that. Should you ever have questions about where your local home energy assistance office is, please visit the website or please contact me directly. I'm happy to guide your constituents through that process at any time. Next slide, please. So the statutory income eligibility guidelines for all of the energy assistance programs I'm going to talk about is 175% of the federal poverty guideline. We calculate that income based on the household's gross income for the past 30 days. So we're not looking at the entire year, we're looking at the past 30 days anytime we're processing an application for energy assistance. I think that's particularly responsive to the current crisis and something that we'll continue to do going forward. Programs are one-time financial benefits that customers have to reapply for annually for eligibility determination. Previously approved applicants 65 plus who have already gone through the process need only sign a redetermination form. That's something new that we introduced a couple years ago to reduce the burden on those who are 65 plus or disabled and on a fixed income. They can simply recertify each year to streamline the process. Next slide, please. This is the income table at present. I thought it was important just to give context. It shows how the 175% federal poverty level plays out over household size. I would note at the bottom, we have not been counting in the countable income, the CARES Act individual rebates or any of the additional unemployment assurance that was included with the pandemic response bills. We do count regular unemployment as income, but the rest of that has been excluded and will continue to be excluded, including any additional boosts that come from federal legislation moving forward. Next slide, please. All energy assistance programs are single application. So when you're applying for MEEP, EUSP, the arrearage programs, it's a single application, whether it's in paper form or through the DHS website, wherein you could submit the application for energy assistance along with SNAP, TCA, TDAP, the other programs administered by the department. I would also note that this application serves as the referral to the DHCD administered weatherization energy efficiency programs. Next slide. Just going through, these are very busy slides. I apologize, but I wanted to give the information on each of the benefits. So the Electric Universal Service Program, which is overseen by Chairman Stanik's commission. We meet with them every year to review the plan for this. It provides financial assistance specifically for electric bills. It's funded largely through ratepayer surcharge. We also receive some funds for this through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative via the Maryland Strategic Energy Investment Fund. These are typically meant to be split into 12 equal installments to help with the affordability of the bill going forward. We calculate those benefits based on the annual electric use that we obtain from the utility, the average cost per kilowatt hour, and the poverty level percentage of that household. I would note that in this time of significant arrearages, if there is an outstanding past due bill that cannot be resolved by one of the arrearage retirement benefits due to a lack of eligibility or insufficient benefit, these EUSP benefits can be applied in full to that arrearage amount, which can help folks in crisis when they're not eligible for the other benefits. The electric account does have to be in the applicant's name, I would note, for this program. The minimum benefit is $150, the average is $447, and the max goes to over $2,000, although that's fairly uncommon. Next slide, please. The next is MEEP, commonly known as MEEP, the Maryland Energy Assistance Program, the oldest energy assistance program, which is directly funded through LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which is a federally funded program. Payments are made to the fuel supplier utility company on the customer's behalf. The same goes for EUSP. MEEP funds may be used to repair some equipment for those who are in an emergency, but it goes to whatever the heating source is for that household. So this pays for everything from wood and coal to electric heat and everything in between. So the benefits for MEEP are calculated considering average annual usage and cost for each type of fuel and the poverty percentage. And the benefits for MEEP do vary significantly based on how they heat their home, because we look specifically at home heating costs and calculating those benefits, but the minimums are similar to those of EUSP. Next slide, please. Now to our electric and gas arrearage retirement assistance programs, which will be particularly important during this time. This helps provide assistance up to $2,000 for those past due electric and or gas bills. Thankfully, 2 years ago, we added the Gas Arrearage Retirement Assistance Program, which is funded through the LIHEAP funds. We're happy to have that in place at this time. Originally, when this was launched, some of you may have been around, this was a once in a lifetime benefit. Eventually, it became a once every 7 years benefit. It is applied in full to that customer's account. And I would just note that we do have certain exceptions for those who have already received it within that 7-year period. So if there are medically fragile individuals, household members over 65, children under 2 in the household, and they haven't received more than $800, they can receive an additional benefit up to that $2,000 amount. The typical arrearage benefit is $862. That's not something we determine. We just pay exactly what is presented at the time of application for the arrearage. And those benefits are for both, those numbers are both for gas and electric arrearages. Next slide, please. I just wanted to highlight this. I think during this time, we're going to be continuing to improve our screening and communications with customers around the vulnerable population waivers, that even if they've received it within those 7 years, but they meet these criteria, they can receive an additional arrearage benefit within that period of time. Next slide, please. To Chairman Stanik's point, by regulation, local OHEP offices must process the applications within 45 days. We monitor that closely on a daily basis. Right now, the statewide average is 19 days. It does vary by jurisdiction. Some are much lower, some is a little bit higher. But we continue to prepare for the transition to ensure that we are processing these applications as quickly as possible. And it does typically take 1 to 2 billing cycles for the customers to see those grants on billing statements. However, we do have other ways of communicating with the utility and ensuring that they are aware that this person is in the process of obtaining or at least seeking energy assistance. We do have 55-day holds that can be placed, and we plan to use those quite a bit in the coming months to place the holds on the account, which then notifies that utility that they are in the process of applying for energy assistance. Also, we can make commitments the moment that that is certified. We can put it into the utility system or call it in to make sure that they are aware those funds are on the way. So it doesn't take the check getting there before these funds can be seen as coming. Next slide, please. So part of the discussion previously was around crisis season approaching. And I did want to highlight that we are under our own crisis season protocols starting November 1st. During crisis season, for those who have a life-threatening issue, no supply of fuel, utility service already disconnected, or other issues, we are mandated to address that within 18 hours. And that can be done through a number of ways. So even if the applicant has not completed a full application that allows us to fully screen for eligibility, they can sign a crisis season affidavit basically saying that I believe I am eligible for this, and they can receive a minimum benefit that would alleviate that crisis. In the case of fuel, we can make a minimum delivery and so on and so forth. For the 48-hour crises, a lot of times we're calling in those 55-day holds, notifying the utility that they are in the process of seeking energy assistance. And those all start November 1st. I would just note that, we are in the process of updating our crisis season plans to prepare really to be in crisis mode as soon as October 1st. And we met this morning with all the agencies again to review those. I feel as though we're approaching preparedness for all of this and ready to move into crisis season early this year. Next slide, please. This is just regarding what I was talking about earlier in terms of when the clock starts. When we have an application and in the crisis season declaration form, we can start taking action on that activity. Next slide, please. So with regard specifically to pandemic response, obviously Governor Hogan acted early to put the moratoria in place, which was important to protect accounts during that period. The series of executive orders certainly helped to create space to plan and to think through it. OHEP initiated a series of stakeholder meetings to discuss the challenges posed by the eventual return to collections activities. Those were participated in by the utilities, Office of People's Counsel, Public Service Commission staff, and a lot of good thinking and conversations came out of those. And each time, the moratorium was coming to an end, we would have gathered to look at what we were doing to prepare for this. And a lot of that had to do with just process for allowing the handling of applications. So we moved toward a lot of telephonic signatures, taking applications or filling out forms over the phone, allowing for a lot of electronic signatures, and really trying to allow for greater access during a period where people were stuck at home and unable to get into an office physically. And one of the other key things I want to mention is that we did release the MEEP money significantly early this year. We had been pushing it up a little bit every year. We're happy to release all of those MEEP funds, those benefits for those who had been approved on July 15th in conjunction with the initial program year release of EUSP. And a big part of that was to ensure that those MEEP funds, when needed to address the current situation, were on accounts early. Next slide, please. So in a typical year, this is an important context, applications from households that are off service or have a termination notice account for about half of all the applications we receive. This is why we obviously anticipate the application and benefits increasing significantly after the initial issuance of termination notices. One of the important things, and I don't think Chairman Stanek touched on this, but one of the great results, I believe, of Public Conference 53 was that the utilities agreed to provide OHEP and the local agencies the lists of all those customers receiving termination notices. And those will include name, address, email, phone number, et cetera. These are somewhat similar to the affidavit list we would receive during crisis season to allow us for outreach, allow us to engage in direct outreach to those customers. but obviously they're moved up. They're going to be a lot longer. And so we continue to look at the ways we are going to use those for direct outreach, but also to assess the scope of what we're facing to ensure that we have the capacity to handle increases in applications during this period. We have meetings again next week as we get closer. We don't know at this time how big those lists will be, but a big part of our strategies out of those lists will be determined by how we can segment those lists and approach them to properly provide support to those customers. Next slide, please. This just shows the effect that the moratoria had on those seeking assistance. July is typically our busiest year. That's the blue at the bottom. Applications were down in each of those months. That's September year to date, as of last week, in fact. I will note that since September 1st, applications have started to tick up. We're now just about exactly where we were as of an hour ago. We're just about where we were this time last year. But applications certainly were slow in coming in. And again, a big part of that is the effect that about 50% of the applications we receive come with a termination notice. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, local agencies are currently revising their crisis response plans, looking basically as us entering October 1 as crisis season. We're working on prominent messaging on the website and outbound DHS materials, coordinating messaging with utilities on their public service announcements and other efforts that they are working on. We're moving to prioritize energy assistance in the DHS call center queue. So as of tomorrow, energy assistance will be up in the queue. Obviously, folks have a lot of different needs during this time, but we recognize that energy is now coming to the front, or at least up near the front. And we're also working internally to upgrade our data management system. And really, this is inside baseball, but really improving our capability of mailing forms and follow-up information with customers who are missing information. We recognize that we're going to see a lot of new customers, folks who have not gone through the process before, who are unaware of what they need to submit. And so I really think this automated capability to mail out forms right away and to get those in the mail will be helpful in completing applications. Next slide, please. Chairman Stanik's point, there's a significant amount of funds available. We ended the year with some federal fiscal year 20 LIHEAP funding. We obviously have 119 million in the current appropriation for benefits alone. And then we did receive the additional 19.4 million in CARES Act funding. And we do believe that this is going to be adequate to address the need that we see. Obviously, we'll be monitoring that on a regular basis as we receive those turn-off notice lists and as we see what is coming down the pike. But we're comfortable right now with where we are from the funding perspective. I'm happy to keep you apprised of the progress as we move forward and move into October and November, and happy to take any questions you may have.
I think we have two, Delegate Walker and Delegate Brooks that I'm aware of, and I will check the chat to see who else just signed in. Delegate Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm on my telephone now. So it goes back to the fundamental question I've been dealing with, and this is regarding the income level. So if you're a real situation, constituent family of mine, they pay approximately between $350 to $400 per month in electricity for the electricity bill. Husband has been laid off. This was a household that made probably $120,000 a piece, $120,000 combined, family of four. Husband is collecting unemployment now, so now their income is probably around $65,000, but they still got this mortgage and everything else they're paying. Are they in jeopardy because they don't qualify for these programs? So where do we send them for help?
There are, thank you very much, Delegate Walker, for that question. It is a difficult one to answer for those households who are still well above the 175% federal poverty level. By federal statute, LIHEAP is not designed to be responsive to those households. There are some community agencies, whether it's the Washington Area Fuel Fund, the Fuel Fund of Maryland, others who do have much higher income thresholds. So there's an opportunity there. In that specific situation, if I were talking to them, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm saying they've been paying you all a lot of money for a number of years, and to go with an outside source doesn't seem like, that we're taking care of the people of our own. They can't, they'll turn in all the paperwork they need, but then why is there a program in place during these extreme times that we can offer to people in Maryland?
Yeah, I don't have necessarily an answer to that in terms of why there's not a program in place for those who are over the income thresholds for other social service programs.
Is there talk? I mean, are there relief amounts? Is there something that maybe we need to look at as a legislative body?
Yeah, I mean,
to
just
do?
to be clear, yeah, our office, we administer the program and we are the eligibility office. So we determine eligibility based on the existing statutory and regulatory guidelines. We are not determining, we're not developing new programs to address individuals who are not served by those programs. So I do think it would have to be addressed through a different channel, whether it's legislative or otherwise.
Okay, I mean, and not to pick on you, but I've been asking like different folks, say, what's the channel we have to do in order to help people out, particularly during a crisis situation? I mean, whether it's the utilities earlier, that they got some help from federal government when things got really tough on them, and I'm sure they didn't have to qualify and show how much income they were earning off of this. They probably had to show how much they lost. But it's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman Davis, I'm gonna end it right there. It's just getting very, very frustrating. And I do think what Senator Augustine said brought a valid point earlier. Like, we know that the cutoff deadline is coming November 1st. So if you have people now that have been getting like the moratorium, you don't have to pay this stuff right now and can't be evicted. Well, they think they'll have to pay, and then the winter's gonna hit, and then all of a sudden they're not gonna owe just that little amount, not little amount, but whatever the amount is that they owe in October. By the time we get to February, March, when they're eligible to be evicted or cut off, that could be a whole lot more, and the payment arrangement's going to be astronomical. Thank you.
Delegate Brooks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, may I jump back one panel to Chairman Stanek, if you will?
Chairman Stanek, are you willing?
I'm still here, yes. Hello, Delegate Brooks.
Hi, sir. Yeah, the regulations governing budget billing simply requires the utility companies to offer it, but it does not require them to disclose the methodology or the manner by which they true up customers' outstanding balances or credits, So further, there is no stratification when it comes to the budget billing balances. And in other words, you might have an outstanding budget balance, but there's no clarity as to how much is owed for distribution or supply charges. So, it's all sort of lumped together. So how could we address that?
Well, from the customer's perspective, they see the total amount that is owed, and that would be comprised of both distribution, excuse me, and supply costs together. So that would be the bottom line for the customer, trying to get that arrearage down. Obviously, we do have classic budget billing programs, but what I was referencing earlier, either the 12 or 24-month repayment plan, are not associated with those budget billing programs that the utilities have offered for some time. This is going to be a separate part of the COVID relief package to allow some type of a fixed payment plan for 12 up to 24 months. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I hope I did.
All right, that's good. All right. Now I'll jump to Bill Ferguson. Bill, thanks for your, Bill Freeman, I'm sorry. Thanks for your presentation. Hey, since these customers are benefiting from the, economically, from the payments on their behalf, will they be issued 1099s or some other type of information return to acknowledge those economic benefits?
No, we don't issue 1099s. Those payments are all, the benefit payments are all made directly to the utility or the fuel provider, so they don't show up with the customer at all. So we make those on behalf. We don't issue anything beyond the benefit notice to them indicating what payments have been made on their behalf.
Okay, all right, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Freeman and Chairman Stanek, for your presentations. I have a question about one of the sources of affordable housing in several communities that I represent are condominiums. And so the common ownership communities, many of them are older housing stock, and they have, 1 meter for 6 homes or whatever it is, the master metered homes. And so these communities, people in there, as they're struggling, have been unable to pay their condo fee, and then the condo pays the electricity and gas. And I'm just wondering, as I understand it, those individuals and those common ownership communities are not eligible for these traditional energy assistance programs, but they're in this sort of very similar, their incomes, the individuals within this, these homes, especially now, would certainly qualify, and the entire, and the common ownership communities are struggling to pay their bills. And so multiple individuals are at danger of getting cut off. And I'm just wondering if there's any flexibility in any of the systems that could support these families, and or maybe this part is to Chairman Stanek, as you've looked at PC 53, I didn't see it, and I may have missed it. And are you looking at this, or can you look at this in your next iteration of PC 53? There's definitely a lot of affordable housing that is, through common ownership communities in our area anyways. And so it's an issue that has to be addressed somehow.
Delegate Charkoudian, thank you for the question. It does get complicated in these situations. And I'd be happy to point you to all the details and the different scenarios. However, people in master meter apartments, whatever the setup, can be eligible for MEEP. It often involves, landlord agreements. Many of our agencies in Montgomery and Prince George's, where most of these are found, do have stacks of landlord agreement pages. And a lot of those are the condo setups wherein they have the arrangements to pay the entity that's responsible for the bill for whether it's rent reduction or other actions taken to alleviate pressure on the actual resident. It gets into issues of sometimes direct payment as well, but there are options for master metered households to receive MEEP. For EUSP, it does become a bit of an issue because we do document the responsibility for the electric bill. So you need the name on the bill and the exact usage, but there are MEEP opportunities for most individuals living in master metered apartments.
So they would apply for that through the in Montgomery County, that would be through the Montgomery County Department of
Health and Human Services.
Health and Human Services. The individuals would apply to MEEP, and the money would go to whoever's paying the master meter, or to them, and they would pay?
Depending on the particular situation and whether there's a landlord agreement in place, and there are a number of variables with those different housing setups.
Mm-hmm.
But many of them are eligible for the MEEP benefit.
So MEEP's available, but the other, what's the other one? That's
electric, the EUSP. So that just becomes the complication of whether or not they are responsible for their electric bill.
Okay, maybe I'll follow up with you directly, because I'm
happy to talk about that, and I'll point you to the detail. It is one of the thorniest issues just in terms of sorting those matters out.
Okay, thanks.
But most are eligible.
And Delegate, in terms of PC 53, while master metered issues was not a focus of our conference, it was raised at various points, and we're aware of the housing stock in Prince George's and Montgomery counties, and it is on the record. So it's something that we'll be looking at going forward.
Okay. We'll take one more question from Senator Augustine. I think, guys, because our Zoom time is going to run out, we've already, and we still got
and we've got
ways to
3
go.
other presenters too, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. I was just saying, we still got some more to go, so we're going to have to pick it up just a little bit, guys. Senator Augustine.
Then I will hold off on my question, Chair Davis.
No, go
problem.
ahead, sir. You Please ask your question.
Okay, really briefly, and since Chair Stanek is still here, they identified $300 million as being in arrears. Have they identified within that 300 million, or do we know within that 300 million, what percentage of that is for people who would qualify for the programs that are available versus those who would not qualify, who, I am very concerned, are going to find themselves in this very difficult situation?
We don't have exact numbers. We hope to get better numbers when the utilities begin their official data reporting on November 1st. But by very rough estimates, a large number of the people that are facing substantial arrears right now are those customers that had trouble paying their bills prior to COVID. Of course, there are newly economically challenged folks that are just entering the system and trying to navigate OHEP, a system that they are not familiar with. But a large amount of the arrearages can be attributed to customers that were previously receiving energy assistance.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on, please.
Thank you, Chair Davis, Chair Kelly, members of the committee, Paula Carmody for the Office of People's Counsel. And I do realize the clock started ticking a while ago. Our presentation is going to be relatively brief compared to some of the others. Next slide, please. Well, we're here obviously because this is an unprecedented health and financial crisis. And I think it's really important to recognize two things. One, the state of emergency continues in this state, acknowledged by Governor Hogan's extension. And it's a very different kind of crisis when you compare it to the Great Recession and other recessions and weather events. So we have to come up with new solutions. I did want to point out here that, certainly there's been heightened importance on internet services due to the reliance on telehealth, distance learning, deliveries. Certainly last spring, people needed food delivered to their house and other essentials. Certainly air conditioning, if we did not have a moratorium in place, it would have been a severe issue during this past summer, particularly in July and parts of August. And it's already been recognized that we're coming into a winter cold weather season starting on November 1. Next. Most of my presentation will just be on OPC actions that we've taken since the start of the state of emergency. And it really falls into two categories, information and outreach, and I'll be talking in more detail about that. And also our June 26th petition that we filed with the Public Service Commission with a proposal. And just generally speaking, that proposal that we presented to the commission was looking for a statewide rule consistency across the board, not individual utility rules, a moratorium extension, flexible affordable payment plans, no late fees, security deposits, or down payments for people participating in the plans, reconnection of previously disconnected customers in data collection and reporting. Certainly as the prior presenters had indicated in the commission's ruling on August 31, many of our proposals were, I believe, adopted as part of the PC 53 rulings on August 31. Next, please. Much of this has already been discussed in prior presentations, but one thing I did want to point out, which is important for folks to know, is that the executive orders apply to both utility services, but also to other residential services, public water companies, internet and broadband services, and cell phone and VoIP services. With the expiration of the governor's moratorium, The unregulated residential services, are no longer covered, and the Public Service Commission, of course, doesn't regulate those services. So I just wanted to note that in the current situation, those do not have any restrictions on them. Certainly with public water companies in Baltimore City, they have adopted what they call H2O affordability programs that operate in the city. And WSSC, which serves Prince George's County, Montgomery County, do have some affordability programs that they did set up over the last year or two. Next slide, please. So specifically during, since March, and I'll be talking about our involvement in the Public Service Commission proceedings in a couple of minutes. We certainly have provided advocacy in those proceedings. We also have continued to provide direct assistance for vulnerable customers that have contacted our agency, alerts to our outreach network, training, webinars, resource information. We have provided flyers extensively, and we are continuing with our utility bill clinics. Next. So with regard to the Public Service Commission proceedings, as I indicated, we did file the petition on June 26. Subsequently, the Commission established PC 53, which was a broadened public conference addressing a number of issues related to the utilities, but also incorporated the concerns that we had addressed in the June 26 petition. We did file extensive comments to supplement and also support the proposals we made in the June 26 petition, participated in the hearing, and subsequently, after the August 31 ruling, filed a request for clarification. As Chairman Stanek indicated in his presentation, the Commission did issue a further ruling just yesterday, responding to our clarification requests, and I think some other requests that other parties had made during the hearing. And so we do have some further clarification as to how some of those rulings, will apply and how the utilities are going to be required to carry them out. With regard to the arrearage management proposals, one thing that I would note is that our agency actually over the past, I'd say 12 to 15 years has brought before the Public Service Commission various proposals or requests for investigation with regard to percentage of income plans and arrearage management proposals, specifically back in 2012, 2013, and some other dates, certainly predated the time that Chairman Stanek has been on board. So we actually welcome the opportunity to further investigate these arrearage management or forgiveness plans. And we certainly have retained consultants. We will be submitting working with the utilities over the next couple of weeks and submitting comments with regard to the proposals that the utilities will file. Next slide, please. So with regard to resources and outreach, just wanted to point out we just updated our resource guides. We have been putting these out for close to 20 years. They are all up on our website. They are available for each county in Baltimore City, and they contain a lot of extensive information on energy efficiency program and energy assistance programs, energy efficiency programs, water assistance, other types of assistance through government agencies. And we have found that agencies use these resource guides and have found them quite helpful. So the updated versions just went up on our website a day or so ago. We have developed an outreach network, and I have to give credit to Brandy Neeland. She is our Consumer Assistance Unit Executive Director. She came on board 2 days before the remote work requirement went into place. So she started her job with us working remotely. Had many years with the United Way 211, so brought a depth of experience. So we now have a network of over 660 individuals, government agencies, and nonprofits that receive different alerts and other information from us. So we have been putting out a large number of alerts starting the springtime and up through, I guess, yesterday with regard to the resource guide. And the whole goal of this is really grassroots and trying to reach the community as to what the status of the moratorium orders were, OHEP energy assistance. We have been encouraging in those alerts groups and individuals to contact their utilities with regard to payment plans. And this, goes way back through the spring and the summertime. Informing these groups about the commission proceedings and providing other information about housing, unemployment, compensation issues, and other basically sources of assistance that might be helpful to houses that are in distress right now. Next slide, please. One of the things that we've been able to really increase our ability to do is with training and webinars, and really have to thank Brandy Nealand again for this. Just in the last several weeks, we have made training and webinar presentations to a variety of organizations, reaching out to hundreds of attorneys working in legal organizations as well as nonprofit agencies. And we've been able to use this not only to kind of keep folks up to date on what's happening with the moratorium, with energy assistance and the OHEP programs, with alternate payment plans and how to navigate with the utilities in terms of working out payment plans, but also providing other utility related information. We will continue to do this actually throughout the fall and permanently. I would have to say that in the last few months, we've done more training and webinar sessions than we did in the prior fiscal year. So we really are, I'm very excited about this as a way to get information out to folks and to organizations that work with certainly the residential households across the state. Next, please. This was one of the things that we did. We were trying to figure out ways in the middle of the summer to get out fast information to people where they are. And I think everybody knows that there have been real demands on food delivery networks in terms of people showing up at food banks, pantries, schools, looking for assistance just to get food on the table. So what we did was prepare and we distribute over 100,000 flyers. And these were delivered to the different food banks, food pantries. Some of you may be familiar with Meals on Wheels and Movable Feast, which are making deliveries to households with people with serious illnesses. And, we're a simple flyer, and the two messages were contact your utility, work on payment plans. But just as importantly, you may be eligible for energy assistance. One of the things that has been talked about, but we think is really critical, is that many of the people who became suddenly unemployed or underemployed, even if they're kind of back on track a little bit, have not had any contact with social service agencies, with maneuvering through this whole process, don't even know that assistance is available. So we've been trying to work through different networks to reach not only people who perhaps have been participating in these programs or eligible for the programs, but the groups of people who are now kind of newly eligible and really just have no idea where to go. Additionally, one of the things that we have done in the past, and we're going to try to increase participation in our utility bill assistance clinics. These are done virtually now through Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Association and the Pro Bono Resource Center. And so this has worked out really, really well. Next, please. I'm just going to take a time to make a few comments. I think one of the things that has come out of these discussions is that we know that there are, in a sense, different groups of people who are in severe financial distress with regard to their utility bills. And it's not just the utility bill, it's the rent, it's the mortgage, it's the car payment. If you're looking at certainly the folks that we're trying to drive assistance to, all those folks that lost their jobs suddenly. It was like going off a cliff back in March. And many of them ended up spending months trying to get access to unemployment assistance. They were waiting for stimulus checks to pay all of their bills. So even if they became reemployed, they may have become reemployed, but reduced hours. And certainly that is very typical of what we're hearing from the service industry. They may be back, instead of working 5 days, working 2 days a week. And they also have a lot of bills and arrears that haven't been paid. Some of them, folks continue to work throughout this whole process, the essential workers who typically are lower wage workers. And we want to get them back into the energy, basically the energy assistance arena. Many of these folks in the past have not asked for energy assistance. We know that only 25% of the eligible households are participating in the OHEP programs right now. So that we know that even if for those folks who've been working, many of those are eligible for assistance that could pay off arrears. So we're trying to target many of these groups, and the two key and interrelated messages that we're trying to get across are, if you think you might be eligible, apply for energy assistance. And in any event, they do need to contact the utilities to work out these payment plans. The payment plans are automatic, as Chairman Stanek indicated. We were hoping for a longer extension of the moratorium, but we are working with our network of agencies to get the word out for people to try to take action. We also were hoping for a longer period of time other than 12 months. But again, we're hoping that the companies will be responsive, and for folks for whom a 12-month repayment plan is not affordable, that those companies will step up to the plate and offer realistic, flexible, and affordable payment plans, however long it takes, so that because the priority is to keep people on service. That is, what we need to do. We can talk about trying to balance the interests of customers and households who need service, our whole residential customer group who are going to be responsible for uncollectibles, and the interests of the utilities. But I think that most of us will say at this point in time, the priority is to place on maintaining service for the customers in need, ensuring that these programs that have been developed provide a realistic opportunity for people to stay on service while they can make those affordable payments. And ultimately, that should benefit the individual customers, should benefit our customers overall, and should benefit the utilities. One thing I just wanted to circle back to, there were some questions and discussions about kind of shared responsibility. And this is something that has come up in conversations with our National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates. We've got about 45 states that have agencies like mine, and all dealing with these very same issues. And I do have to say the conversation keeps coming up, but there has been no real positive solution for many of the same reasons that Chairman Stanek brought up in terms of how rates are set and some of these constitutional prohibitions. But I really would encourage further discussion on this issue. The folks that are in financial pain did not ask for it when they lost their work, when they were told to stay at home, when they have to do distance learning and remote learning and pay these bills. But they ultimately are being held responsible. The ratepayers as a whole were not responsible for this. And I'm not suggesting that the utilities are responsible either, but it would be a wonderful thing if we could all figure out a way that this responsibility is shared across the board and not just laid on the backs of the folks who found themselves in a tricky situation because of a pandemic a health and financial crisis that nobody predicted, nobody wants, and right now we don't know when it's going to end. So with that, I know it's a shortened time period. I had some other remarks, but I'm just going to let them go for now. And I certainly would be glad to answer any questions about our actions or any of the other questions that have been raised to presenters. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Chair Kelly had a question. Chair Kelly?
You know what, in the interest of time, I will give her a call and so we can get to the two final panelists.
Okay. Tell you what, we actually have three. One's not on it. So I tell you what, so in the interest of time, can each one of the panelists, Baltimore Gas and Electric, then Washington Gas, then Pepco, each of you will make your presentations. Maybe one of them will answer any questions we may have. And if not, at the end, then we can ask questions of any of the three. Does that sound okay, Madam Chair?
Yes, that's fine.
All right. BG&E, you guys are up then, it looks like.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Hello again, Chairman Davis and members of the Economic Matters Committee. And now I appreciate also members of the Senate Finance Committee. For the record, again, Charles Washington here on behalf of BG&E. I do not have slides to present, but I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee. BGE was and remains an active participant in PC 53, and of course will comply with the outcomes as described by the earlier panels. However, BGE did not wait for the outcome of PC 53 and instead acted quickly to support our customers at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to take this opportunity just to share with the committee some of the early actions we took. First, BGE proactively suspended service disconnections and waived new late payment charges for customers. The company also reconnected customers that were disconnected before the pandemic to aid in social distance compliance. We took this action before the moratorium was put into place, and we later extended those measures in accordance with the governor's executive orders, and again through November 15th in accordance with the Commission's actions under PC 53. We enhanced the flexible payment plans, retroactive budget billing, and energy management tools and programs, and we conducted significant proactive outreach to customers regarding assistance resources. Some of the things we did with shareholder dollars was we contributed $1.5 million to the Fuel Fund of Maryland. Additionally, BGE, Constellation, and the Exelon Foundation are contributing $1 million to support Maryland relief organizations like some that have been discussed here today, United Way 211, the Baltimore Community Foundation, and the Maryland Food Bank. Earlier this year, BGE provided $1 million in funding directly to county-administered pandemic relief funds in Central Maryland to assist small businesses that have been challenged by the economic hardships of the COVID-19 response. And Mr. Freeman briefly mentioned this, but I think it's important to reiterate that in coordination with valued partners like OHEP, the Maryland Fuel Fund, PHI, and others, BGE has taken the lead in developing a statewide public service announcement, what we're calling the We Can Help ad campaign, to encourage our customers to contact us and to increase our customers' awareness of payment plan options and of the energy assistance that remains available to them. So I really appreciated this opportunity to touch on some of the actions BGE has already taken to support our customers, specifically in Central Maryland more generally during this pandemic. But as I think through all of our efforts, I'm possibly most excited about a project we are continuing to work on so that we can launch it next year. I know that many on the committees are familiar with Allison Black, who, in addition to her responsibilities in Annapolis, leads BGE's economic development team. Beginning next year, Allison and her team will establish a small business relief grant program. Under that program, businesses with fewer than 25 employees in the BGE service territory will be eligible to receive grants up to $20,000 each to aid in their recovery from the pandemic. As we finalize the details of that program, we really look forward to partnering with each of you to reach the businesses in your districts and give them the opportunity to take advantage of that program. So with that, Mr. Chair, again, I appreciate the committee affording me this opportunity, and in accordance with your direction, I'm available for questions after the other utilities present.
WGL.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. Good to see everyone. Chairwoman Kelly, good evening. At this point, Brian Smith with Washington Gas. We will be brief, and we've been listening intently, so we'll just try and fill in some holes from what we've heard so far, just so we're not repeating information. Alongside me tonight is Deshandra Jones, who's our Director of Customer Experience, and she'll focus on sort of customer outreach and communications tactics we've implemented, as well as budget billing. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Anthony Murdoch, who's our Director of Customer Billing and Revenue Assurance, and he'll deal with arrearages and any questions that may arise from that. So we also don't have a deck, and I'll just hand it over to Deshandra.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Chairman Davis, Chairwoman Kelly, and committee members. I too appreciate the opportunity to just share with you guys this evening some of the things that we've done at Washington Gas to get ahead of the pandemic from a proactive perspective. We, much like BG&E and others, did not wait for any of the orders to come through. As early as the middle of March, we suspended late fees and suspended disconnections for our customers. Additionally, we have 4 walk-in offices, and we closed all of those walk-in offices to the public so that we could protect the safety of our community and our employees. I shifted that capacity and had those employees begin to do proactive outreach to our customers. Proactive outreach directly, and I think we talked about it a little bit here today already, proactive outreach directly to those customers who were impacted post-pandemic, not necessarily the customers who may have had arrearages prior. So I had them do direct outbound calls to over 3,000 customers, advising them of energy assistance that was available in the state of Maryland, advising them of payment arrangements that require no down payment or security deposits. At that time, it was 12 months and it required nothing from the customer. At this point, post PC 53, we're offering up to 24 months as well. We also did proactive outbound automated messaging to every customer who had an arrearage on our books. We did the same messaging to those customers as well, letting them know specifically by region what was available to them from an energy assistance perspective, what was available to them from a payment arrangement perspective, and also how they could make payments if they chose to via contactless and safe ways. We continue to correspond with our customers via email. We do this as frequently as every 2 weeks, letting customers know where we are and where we stand from a safety perspective and what is available to them. We continue to do social media outbursts. We do Facebook Live presentations, and I've done direct mailings as well to our customers. I should have said early on when I started this that I am also a proud constituent of District 26. So I did hear Delegate Walker talk about, customers that are literally right down the street from me who may have found themselves in a predicament that they're not used to. I too am virtually doing the school thing from home and working at the same time, and my family income has been impacted by way of my husband as well. So I absolutely get it. And, for those customers, those payment arrangements are in place, and all they need to do is either contact Brian or contact me directly, and we'll make sure that they get what they need. The goal for us, and I think this was mentioned here today, the goal really is to keep our customers connected, especially from a gas perspective as we go into the winter time. A couple of other things I really wanted to mention to you guys that I'm pretty proud of as well. We've wrapped all of those things that I just mentioned into our initiative called WG Cares. And post PC 53, we'll also be doing some PSA, outbound communications via media, whether that is television, continued print and or radio, focusing on, again, the fact that WG has these initiatives for customers and the fact that there are energy assistance dollars that are available. We also recently created a gift of warmth program. And what that gift of warmth program does for our customers is allows customers who may be in a better position to either anonymously or by name make payment on another customer's bill. So that's available, and that's available now. Our website has landing pages that provide most of the information that has been provided today by Mr. Freeman and others from an energy assistance perspective, as well as how they can apply. It directs them directly to the website for their region and or provides them with the contact to do just that. We continue to look for ways in WG Cares to be proactive with customers, and based on the recent orders and the fact that, we're looking quite soon at the discontinuance of the moratorium, we'll be doing some, targeted proactive outbound messaging to our customers in Maryland. And I've already redirected, again, that walk-in staff to focus in on our Maryland customers so that they know that the moratorium is ending, and again, that these energy assistance dollars are available. In addition to that, that the payment arrangements, be it 12, 24, or in some outlying situations, whatever may be needed for the customer, is available. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned those things here today. I know we're short on time, but I'm absolutely open to taking any questions that the committee may have at the end.
And good evening, everyone. If it's okay to start, Mr. Chairman?
Just a second. And
sure.
They had 3 people. Is it just the 2 of you all testifying or 3?
We also have our colleague, Anthony Murdoch. I don't know if he's still on here.
He is.
Yes.
Perfect.
Murdoch, in the interest of time, I'll be available for questions post the presentations.
Okay. And
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to everybody. Ann Linder on behalf of PEPCO. I really appreciate the opportunity to present today. I know the committee has been having some discussions around PEPCO specifically in some of the communications that we've been sending out, and that happened at your last committee hearing. So I'm thankful to be able to provide some information in that regard. We undertook the same early actions as BG&E in terms of suspending disconnects, suspending late payment fees, and offering payment plans of up to 2 years. In addition to that, we've been working closely with our nonprofit partners in order to provide resources for those that have been significantly impacted. Across both the PEPCO and Delmarva service territories, we've made contributions totaling approximately $2 million. And just by way of example, this includes about $500,000 to support students, as well as $500,000 in small business grants. In terms of customer support, we've reached out to customers via multiple channels, and that includes email, social media, and traditional media. And our efforts there have been focused on educating customers, proactively contacting customers that are in arrears, and that is via email, not via outbound calls. I did confirm that we are not doing outbound calls. So, and then also encouraging customers to contact the company to make payment plans. From a small business perspective, we are also proactively contacting those small businesses that are in arrears and encouraging them to reach payment arrangements with us. Finally, we are working diligently to pull together the arrearage management program proposals per the PSC's direction in PC 53. So with that, Mr. Chairman, given the time, I'm just available to take questions with the rest of the folks.
all right, I haven't seen anything in the chat yet, but does anyone have any questions? Senators, I know how ECM goes. We're getting close to the dinner hour, so I think we're running out of gas here. But does anyone have any questions while we have the folks? If not, I want to thank all of our presenters today. Oh, Delegate Brooks, I don't want to forget. Delegate Brooks, while we have a few minutes, you submitted a slide deck. Did you want to present it, or did you just want us to have it? It's up to you. You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, let me just say a couple of things about it, and then my colleagues, they can use it as a resource. But if Bob could, can you bring that panel up, bring that slide up, Bob? I'll tell you what, apparently you're not. Yeah, but in summary, what it is it shows what the impact of COVID-19, and there are about eight panels there. Talks about the moratorium and gives you some highlights on that. For greater detail, you can go to, oh, here we go. Good. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, it's, hold on one sec. Yeah, it's full screen. Yeah, it speaks to the impact of COVID-19, and talks about the moratorium. You know, the dates that that the moratorium was pushed back to. 45 days, and you get a 14-day notice from that. The residential customers in arrears, you've got 45 days to pay. Utilities must offer a payment plan, 12 or to 24 months. And utilities cannot require a down payment or deposit on that. Next slide, please. Okay, and some of the funds or some of the things that BGE and PEPCO did to respond to the need of the customers here, and some of the monies that they contributed. I'll just let you read through that. But each month, you can do an installment between 0 and 10% of the amount amount in arrears, plus the regular monthly charge. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this is the Washington Gas response. 0 down on the repayment. You got up to 12 months to pay that for all customers. And some of their public outreach, phone calls, emails, direct mails, bill inserts, and then referral to OHEB. Next slide, please. Okay, and what I did here, this is the Maryland Energy Assistance Program. These are the left column, the different programs that are offered through EUSB and the other. The administrating office, phone numbers, and email address, so you can contact them. The eligibility requirements, all listed here. Most of them is 175% of the federal poverty level. And then, of course, the program benefits, and that lists out exactly. Here again, for greater detail, you can go to OHEB. Bob, next slide, please. Okay, here's some additional information. OHEB, the Good Neighbor Energy Fund program that administers through the Salvation Army in those particular districts, and the Good Neighbor Energy Fund Expansion Fund. Here again, the services, the agency that you want to reach, the services, the qualifications, and of course the services it provides. And the next slide. Okay, and these are some of some statistics we got from BGE and the other companies about the arrearages, and then the different organizations, large, small, residential, and whatnot. So that's just information for you to just look at. And the very next slide, please. Okay, and what can we do? Educate. We can be a resource. And as Chairman Stanek talked about the arrearage management program, that's something that we can consider. There's one that's being offered in Massachusetts and I think New York right now. And then we could possibly even come up with some legislation like what we did with the with Empower. So just something for thought. Next slide. And I think that is it. Yeah. So just use it as a resource. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for your hard work, Delegate Brooks. That was really informative. And to the presenters that were all here, thank you so very much. I certainly appreciate all the time you took. I know it's been a long afternoon and into the evening, but this was very important for us. We, as you can tell from the questions, we get a lot from our constituents, so we try to provide them with as much information as possible. Also, for those, I think we have all of the presentations, but if there were some who did not, if it's something that we could have, please submit it to to the committee staff, and we'll make sure that the members get it. Chairwoman Kelly, any parting thoughts?
I think it was very helpful hearing. We get a sense of the whole. I think all of us have been researching and outreaching, and we've been hearing from our constituents. And so we sometimes asking for one answer at the time. I think this is helpful. And I hope everybody has a good evening, and let's be thankful that we are able to serve under these terrible times and to reach out to people and to be a voice for them. And we appreciate all of the information that was brought by those who have responsibilities in these various areas.
All right, everybody, on to your next Zoom meeting.
Okay.
Take care, and thank you all so much.
All right.
Okay.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay.
Okay.